Welcome to HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, I'm dropping into your feed with bite-sized, digestible, but really well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. And let's get right into it. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I bring on my guest, Aron Hyde. Aron, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Toby. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll ask everyone to give a quick listen to your sort of your overview and a bit of your background, but just to kind of spill the beans and mention some of the highlights. You are a guy that, first of all, former national director of the Star Goalkeeper Academy and a player in your own right, but probably most impactfully or germane to today's conversation, professional soccer coach that not only spent time at Chicago Fire, won an MLS Cup with the crew in Atlanta, helped a new team in Charlotte, and took the U.S. national team to the World Cup in Qatar. So really wonderful, illustrious coaching career. And I just thank you for being on.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. So excited to have some conversations about the real world and business and the similarity.
Yeah, I love it. Perfect, man. So if you don't mind, if you just give me just a quick kind of overview of sort of, how you got into the chair today.
Yeah, obviously, ultimately failed as a player, took the route into coaching, figured that was probably my best way to stay involved in the game. And then from there, obviously, I've been fortunate enough, as all of us do along the way, we need a little bit of luck. You meet the right people, you're in the right place at the right moment, and then got good opportunities and been fortunate enough to be able to be successful and have some longevity in the professional game.
Yeah, appreciate that. I guess for the listeners at home, if they need to turn on the English subtitles to just follow along, they can do that. From Birmingham, England originally, and appreciate you being on. Yeah, that's interesting kind of way to start off, I guess. Hearing what you're talking about there, because you're saying hey, listen, I failed as a player, meaning from a business standpoint, look, I was going down one avenue and I liked what we were doing, but we kind of needed to pivot a little bit in order to keep it going, and pivoted by maybe finding some of the right people and the right opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a question, right, that probably a lot of us come to in a crossroads of as you're trying to progress, and everyone has sort of an end goal, right? And always the question, I think, is ultimately how are you going to get there? And sometimes that path will change, and as individuals or as a group, you have to have the ability to be able to sort of pivot and look at different ways to get into the path, or taking a path of how you want to get to where you want to get to, and understanding then what you need to do to achieve that.
Yeah. I'm thinking of so many different things as you're saying that, because I'm fascinated by that idea of how, I wanted to find a path to get there and I needed to pivot. So it's well, then you maybe didn't get there. You got somewhere there or thereabouts, right? Or you're flexible enough with what your idea of there even means, where in the beginning, maybe there meant playing, but when you zoom out, you're well, there just means being around soccer, being around football my whole life. Right. And so that kind of ability to, cast a bit of flexibility can maybe be the reason that we find success.
Totally. And I think the one thing, right, is one of the biggest things that I always encounter these days is everyone wants to hit the home run straight away.
That's what I'm getting at.
I want to get to this part, but they're never looking at, okay, so in order for me to get where I want to get to, maybe I need to go down to this level and gain some experience. Does that put pressure on you to then maybe perform and sort of demonstrate that you show competent at a good level? Yeah, it does, of course. And that's all part of the process then of being able to say, yes, you're ready, or no, you need to maybe go and you need to do something else to maybe then get to where you want to, because obviously there's no sort of straight line, is there, in progression or development? It's very much an undulating path, which obviously sometimes people can get a little bit restless with, but it is the most important part of any journey to get, obviously for me, where you want to get to.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You think you're ready, but maybe you really actually aren't.
Yeah, totally, for sure.
Well, when you are ready and you do get there and you do take those opportunities, talk to me a little bit about what it meant going from different cultures, and obviously not to kind of talk good or bad about any like specific places, but just in general, you've been probably at places that were more favorable or less favorable. Talk to me about maybe how you recognize an environment that feels like, oh, this is the right one, and this is, you call it a winning environment in business. You guys literally have wins and losses and trophies and things like that you're aiming for, but a winning environment maybe doesn't always get a gold medal, but it's got kind of an environment to it. You have some features to those that you can talk to?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I just to backtrack to that, I think, in my experiences, I think the biggest thing that I've learned and become more comfortable with as I've got to sort of more of a better place in terms of my career has been now looking back and going, okay, in the early part, I would consider myself very unsuccessful. However, I learned a lot about what doesn't work. And I think that's just as valuable as always thinking that everything needs to be successful, that like the end goal has to be achieved. So that for me was good exposure and good experience to be able to be fortunate enough to move into better environments and better situations and know, okay, this is right or this is wrong. So, when you sort of get into those better environments, I think, the first thing, and this really for me, I could imagine is no different to any businesses, is the environment and the culture and the cohesion that you create amongst your staff. Recruitment's the fundamental thing of professional sport. So you're obviously recruiting human beings first, and if you don't identify the right human beings for your group and how you're trying to create that environment, then ultimately in tough moments you're always going to have conflict.
Yeah, but at your level, I'm like, everybody runs a 6-minute mile. Everyone runs a 4.540. Everyone's an athlete, right? So fundamentally, something about them is the same, but something between the ears is different, right? There must be something that separates.
Yeah, but I think also, right, so obviously there's the mental skills and the mental aptitude of their ability to stay focused and stay present and be able to then execute under pressure, obviously because they have a high level of skill. But when you think about teams and bringing them together first, you don't want, if you're the manager, you don't want 10 people that are the same as you. So looking at trying to make sure that you identify key people with key skill sets that maybe can complement you. I think that's probably one of the most important things when you think about putting a team out there that's going to go and play. Each player's got a role to play, so therefore they're going to have different skill sets from that standpoint that then hopefully then can all complement each other. So then you get everybody thinking on the same page and you get good understanding. So hopefully then when you go out and, and this is the biggest thing I find is the difference between a business and a professional sports environment is you're getting judged every other day, once a week, 3 times a week, whatever it is. For us, it's once a week. We get judged. Like, there's your performance review. You get a week and you get a performance review. A week and you get a performance review. And that's probably the most uncommon difference. But how we actually get there, there has to be a process in place in terms of making sure that there's some cohesion and making sure that the collective then comes together when they step out there.
And you have to answer for it. I wish, if I had to give a press conference every time I buggered a spreadsheet or something, right? It's like, explain to me what happened on this math that you messed up the decimal on, right? You have to publicly explain where you messed up. But when you're talking about kind of there's a process, and you're talking about sort of being judged on a weekly basis, I'm curious then to see, because there's times I think in the business world too where you do take a couple lumps kind of along the way. So maybe immediately it doesn't look perfect or it's not right, but you really think that the pieces are sort of baking, for lack of a better word. You need to keep going. Talk to me about maybe finding the fortitude when the timing is right to kind of stick with your bigger plan and your bigger thoughts and, bringing the team along in the face of that kind of immediate judgment and pressure.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest things for me when that sort of comes to mind with that is just like the intent of the players that what they're trying to do versus the outcome, and making sure that those are pretty close. So in terms of, do they have the right intention about what they're doing in terms of what you're asking of them? And ultimately you feel as long as there's an alignment there, ultimately the outcome will get to where you want it to get to. Because it's important in sport, like you say, when it's every week, you've got to be careful not to panic quickly and completely change things too much, because that can create that lack of distrust from players to coaching staff. So you've always got to be conscious of making sure that the messaging that you're delivering is consistent from that standpoint, regardless of whether it's good or bad, the performances, because it's probably the old adage, and I'm sure it's the same. When things are good, you can get complacent. And then when things are bad, people start to panic or start to look around at other people, etc. So it's making sure, again, that you just talked about that. So like you already start to see that connection between the environment that you want to create with the people that you're trying to bring in, to make sure that they stay on task with the message and the objective that you're trying to do as a group.
How do you form that messaging? How thoughtful are you about it? How early does that happen? And kind of once you've got that messaging, what percent's kind of on the table to change, and what percent needs to kind of be steady Eddie for the entire season or year or objective campaign?
I think the messaging should start straight away. So, for example, we just started, our pre-season for the upcoming season on Monday, and the messaging from the head coach doesn't change. And I think ultimately what ends up changing is a second year with the head coach now in Charlotte, is that there's an objective more about looking to seriously try and contend to try and win trophies. So yeah, not too much there from that standpoint in terms of complete changes or anything. Consistency in the messaging in terms of making sure that players are aware. Simple messaging, I think, is the other part of it as well. Like try and start going down rabbit holes in terms of trying to get sort of too much information can be very difficult for everyone to process, and can then also lead to a lot of confusion.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes in messaging, what you don't say needs to have as much thought and importance as what you do say, right? You really need to say things and not say things intentionally, so that you're only really saying just the important stuff.
Yeah, totally. And it's, almost for us, is like a big thing, I think, in sport particularly, is that how simple can you get a detailed message across?
Yeah.
And, the longer you go on, the more it makes sense, because when you're younger, you're hungry and you're like, oh, it's got to be this, this, and this. And you get all excited, and then you walk away from it and you're all confused about why, hold on a minute, why isn't it working? And it's, it can also, for me, like, as I've learned through that, and I'm as guilty as anyone of that. Actually, the simpler I do it, and the better I am with the language that I use, the easier it is for everyone to understand and sort of come together.
And how long have you been a professional coach, just for context?
17 years now.
Yeah, right. So it's something that you're saying has evolved sort of over time, and there's been a fair amount of time to it. All right, guys, we have to break the conversation there, because we are sticking to our commitment of keeping our episodes bite-sized and digestible. We will pick this up next week. Thank you to all of our sponsors, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions. We're going to break there, and we're going to pick up with this fantastic conversation next week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.